So if you are involved in the contemporary music industry, you know that there is a lot of hype around extended techniques. What are extended techniques? They are ways of playing the instrument that do not fall in the category of standard techniques. So for instance, on the harp, the standard way of playing is something like this. So an extended technique would be anything that is not this. So it could be, maybe tapping the strings instead of plucking them, or the possibilities are really endless. But what if you actually don't want people to be jumping out of their seats when they hear a big thunderbliss or something like that? What kinds of techniques could you use? So in this video, I'm going to share with you 3 of my favorite subtle extended techniques. So these are techniques that don't sound really different from the normal way of playing, but they add a little bit of extra color without shocking your eye. So the 3 techniques I'm going to share with you are pdlt or pizz, the xylo or xylophonic technique, and the Bartok pizzicato, which you can do on the harp. So the first technique is pdlt or pizz. We abbreviate it. If you're notating it in the score, you would simply write pdlt. And the way to do that is, instead of playing in the middle of the strings, which is where we normally play, we can play very close to the bottom. So it gets a little bit more of a nasally sound. It's a really cool technique. You can use it across the mid-low to mid range of the harp. You can do it at the top of the harp, but the strings are so short you don't really hear that much of a difference. So this really works best in the middle of the harp. The thing to be aware of when you're using this technique is that you have to allow time for the harpist to play very down up to the bottom. When we play in the middle of the strings, we're generally trying to play in the middle, so that means the strings are going to be mostly horizontal. But since the soundboard angles down, we're having to stretch our hand a little bit differently. So keeping that in mind, it's going to take a little bit of time to shift between normal playing and pdlt. The second thing is that because of that different hand position, we need to play in smaller intervals. So on the harp, you can comfortably play an octave, 11th, even 10th, and play pretty big stretches. However, with pdlt, the way that we're stretching, you really want to keep those intervals, the total interval range, around a 5th, and really not go between more than a 3rd, between intervals 3rd or 4th, somewhere around there. We also generally don't use our thumb for pdlt. We sometimes do, but it doesn't sound quite as good, and it's also difficult to make it sound the same as the other fingers simply because of the angle where we're playing. So if you generally are assuming 4 fingers on the harp, for pdlt, think 3. So the second technique I have for you is the xylophonic sounds. We usually abbreviate that XLY, or xylophonic sounds. And the way that we produce this sound is we use one hand to mute the strings down at the bottom, and we use the other hand to play those exact same strings. So here's our normal sound, and then here's the xylophonic sound. So it gives it a really cool color, but it's not super shocking. So it's a really effective technique. Now, the most important thing you're going to have to remember with this is it takes 2 hands to play. So you can't write xylophonic sounds and something else going along with it. It really needs to be one line, one hand playing, because one hand's going to have to be muffling the strings and the other hand is going to have to be playing. For this reason, this is a more effective technique in the mid-range of the harp. You can do it at the top. It gets really awkward with the left hand, and it sounds pretty different. So in the mid-range of the harp generally sounds the best. The other thing to be aware of is, again, you want to try to think in groups of 3 rather than in groups of 4. And the reason is, when I use my thumb to mute the strings, just the sides of the thumb, the shape of the thumb, it's going to raise the pitch a little bit more than the other strings. So generally speaking, You're going to hear a tiny difference in pitch between normal playing and xylophonic sounds. When I add in the thumb, it's a little bit more difficult to keep that minimal. So either I'm going to be trading the quality of the sound or the pitch. It's not going to be able to be both. So something to keep in mind, especially if you're writing this in unison with other instruments. Now, the third technique I have for you is the Bartok pizz. This is something that you do want to use very sparingly because it is a little bit painful if we have to do it a lot. But it's more of an effect, so it's not something that you would want to use all the way through a piece. So the way we get the sound, we set up in the pdlt position, but instead of just playing pdlt, we then slap the soundboard in the same motion. So we play and hit the soundboard. So it's a way to really accent a note. Now, as I mentioned before, this does hurt a little bit just because you have to play with enough force to also hit the soundboard. So it's not something that you want to do more than, a couple times in a piece. This is also something that needs to be an individual note. This isn't something that you're going to do, a string of notes, kind of the same way you would if you were writing Bartok pizz for strings. It's a single note, a single gesture. It's really difficult to set up more than one at the same time. Now, the other thing is that this really does work best in the mid-range of the harp. You can do it lower. It's a little more painful when you do it lower, and if you do it high, it's tough to actually get that slap just because of the way that the strings are and the angle that we're playing. So this is a technique that is going to work better in the mid-range of the harp. So there you go. Those are 3 extended techniques that you can use if you want a slightly more subtle sound to add a little bit of color to your harp writing. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to learn more about writing for the harp. I would also love to invite you to join my email list where I share harp writing tips for composers. So I hope to see you there. In the meantime, I will see you in the next video.